Something inside you has already started dying. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone around you would recognize. From the outside, you still look the same. You still speak the same way. You still move through your days with the same routines and responsibilities. But internally, something fundamental has begun to fracture. And the unsettling part is this: you can feel it. A strange quiet has started to form inside you. Not the quiet of exhaustion, not the quiet of defeat. A colder quiet, a more deliberate one. The kind that appears when the mind stops reacting. People around you will notice before you understand it yourself. They will say you seem distant, that you've changed, that you're harder to read, that something about your presence feels different. They will interpret this as loss. But it isn't loss, it's structural collapse. For most of your life, you have been organised around one central operating system: reaction. You sensed everything in a room, every tension, every emotional shift, every hidden frustration, every silent expectation. Your mind was constantly scanning, adjusting, responding, not consciously, automatically. And that automatic response became your identity. You were the one who understood people, the one who absorbed the atmosphere, the one who adapted to keep peace, the one who felt everything others ignored. This role gave you a strange form of status. People relied on it. They leaned on it. They benefited from it. But what you did not realize was this: the role required constant self-abandonment to survive. Because reacting to everyone else's emotional reality means slowly abandoning your own. Year after year, your nervous system learned the same instruction. Prioritize external signals over internal truth. Someone is upset. Adjust. Someone is uncomfortable. Accommodate. Someone disapproves. Correct yourself. Someone is withdrawing. Fix the tension. At first, this pattern feels like empathy, sensitivity, emotional intelligence. But over time, something begins to deteriorate. Your internal center weakens. And eventually, a quiet realization begins, forming beneath the surface. You are everywhere except inside yourself. For years, this realization stays vague. You cannot fully articulate it. You only feel its symptoms. Fatigue that rest doesn't fix. Irritation you can't explain. A growing intolerance for emotional noise. Conversations that once felt normal now feel exhausting. Social environments begin to feel strangely artificial. You start noticing manipulation patterns you used to ignore. And the more clearly you see them, the less willing you become to participate. This is the beginning of the disruption, not healing. Disruption. Because when a person who has spent decades adapting to others suddenly stops reacting the same way, the entire psychological structure around them destabilizes. People sense it immediately. Your silence starts making them uncomfortable. Your reduced emotional availability begins confusing them. Your patience shortens. Your willingness to rescue disappears. And they cannot understand why. From their perspective, the version of you they relied on is slowly vanishing. But what they cannot see is what is happening underneath that disappearance. The identity you built around being the one who absorbs everything is beginning to collapse. And when that identity collapses, something extremely dangerous appears. Empty space. Most people cannot tolerate this stage, because when a long-held identity dissolves, the mind immediately asks a brutal question. If I am no longer that person, then who exactly am I? For someone whose entire self-concept was built around emotional responsiveness, this moment feels like psychological freefall. You no longer react the way you used to, but you also have not yet become anything new. You feel less available, less reactive, less emotionally entangled, but you also feel strangely undefined. And that uncertainty creates pressure. Your mind will attempt to repair the old identity. It will try to bring back the familiar version of you, the helpful one, the understanding one, the one who fixes everything, because familiarity feels safer than emptiness. But here is the quiet truth most people never hear. If that old identity survives, you will repeat the same life forever, the same emotional exhaustion, the same invisible resentment, the same cycles of overgiving and slow depletion. And the part of you that is becoming quiet right now knows this. That quiet you feel forming inside you is not weakness. It is resistance. Your psyche is withdrawing energy from a system that has drained you for years. It is beginning to shut down the reflex that made you emotionally available to everything around you. And when that reflex weakens, people will interpret it as you becoming colder, more distant, more guarded. But something far more serious is actually happening. Your identity is losing the structure that once controlled it. And once that structure collapses fully, you will face a choice most people never consciously encounter. You can rebuild the same identity again, or you can allow the version of you that existed for years to disappear completely. Very few people allow that disappearance, because what comes after it is something the mind finds extremely difficult to tolerate. The void. And if you stay long enough inside that void, something begins reorganizing itself. Something far more stable than the person you used to be. But the moment before that reorganization is where most people turn back, which is why the transformation almost never completes. And if you are already feeling that quiet forming inside you, then you are closer to that threshold than you realize. What you are experiencing is not random. It is structural. Most people believe psychological exhaustion comes from doing too much, working too hard, or caring too deeply. That explanation is comforting, but it is wrong. The real source of exhaustion is identity misalignment. It happens when the person you present to the world is built around survival patterns instead of internal authority. For years, sometimes decades, you operated through a defensive identity structure. Not intentionally. It developed slowly through repetition. Every time you absorbed someone else's emotional chaos. Every time you prioritized someone else's comfort over your own perception. Every time you silenced your instinct to avoid conflict. Each moment reinforced a simple internal rule. Stability comes from managing other people's emotional states. That rule becomes dangerous over time because it shifts the center of gravity outside of you. Your emotional system stops operating from self-reference and begins operating from external signals. The room dictates your mood. The tension in someone's voice alters your decisions. The disapproval in someone's face changes your behavior. This creates the illusion of empathy. But underneath, something more fragile is happening. Your nervous system becomes addicted to scanning, constantly analyzing, constantly predicting, constantly adjusting. At first, this skill feels powerful. You can read people quickly. You sense hidden intentions. You detect emotional shifts others miss. But what looks like intelligence is often hyper-vigilance built from years of subtle psychological threat. Your system learned to survive by anticipating reactions before they happened. So your mind became a surveillance system, always alert, always calculating, always managing invisible tension. And that level of internal monitoring consumes enormous psychological energy. The tragedy is that the system eventually becomes so familiar you mistake it for your personality. You begin saying things like, "I'm just very empathetic. I naturally understand people. I feel everything deeply." And while those statements contain some truth, they hide something more serious. Much of what you thought was empathy was actually emotional self-abandonment. Because real empathy does not require you to lose your center. Real perception does not require constant emotional absorption. But when your identity forms around being the emotional stabilizer for everyone else, you begin confusing control with connection. You become the quiet regulator in social environments, the one who softens tension, the one who accommodates discomfort, the one who absorbs emotional shockwaves before they spread. And the problem with becoming the regulator is simple. No one regulates the regulator. Everyone benefits from your stability. Very few people protect it. So, over time, something begins eroding inside you. Not dramatically, quietly. Your patience shortens. Your tolerance for emotional manipulation decreases. You start noticing how often people unload their frustrations onto you without ever asking what you are carrying. You notice how many relationships operate on a one-directional emotional flow. Energy moves towards you, rarely away from you. And the moment this pattern becomes visible, something uncomfortable happens. Your brain starts recalculating your entire social history. You replay conversations, interactions, relationships, and suddenly you see dynamics that were invisible before. The subtle guilt people used, the emotional pressure, the dependency disguised as connection, the moments where your instinct said something was wrong, but you ignored it to keep harmony. This is the stage where psychological fatigue turns into psychological clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. The identity that once allowed you to operate smoothly in social environments starts feeling false. You begin withdrawing energy, not intentionally, instinctively. Your nervous system stops volunteering itself as emotional infrastructure for everyone else. That is why the quiet appears. Not because you are becoming detached, because your system is recalibrating authority. But here is where most people misdiagnose the situation. They believe the solution is stronger boundaries, better communication, more assertiveness. Those tools help temporarily, but they do not solve the core issue. Because the core issue is identity architecture. If your identity is still organized around being the sensitive one, the helper, the emotional interpreter, then even strong boundaries become temporary defenses. You will enforce them for a while, then slowly relax them, then re-enter the same dynamic again. The loop repeats. Awareness without identity change simply creates more sophisticated suffering. You understand the pattern, yet still participate in it. This is the stage where many people remain for years. They read psychology, study personality dynamics, learn about narcissism, boundaries, trauma responses. Their vocabulary becomes sharper, but their internal structure remains the same. They are still organized around the wound, still reacting to emotional environments, still quietly negotiating their behavior around the feelings of others, just with better explanations. And the longer this continues, the more internal friction builds. Because a part of you already knows the truth. The role you have been playing is unsustainable. Not because you are weak, because the structure itself is unstable. Eventually, the psyche refuses to keep maintaining it. That refusal is the quiet you feel now. The system is withdrawing energy from an identity that can no longer support you. And when that withdrawal continues long enough, something deeper begins happening. The old self starts destabilizing, not improving, not evolving, destabilizing, which leads to the phase most people misunderstand completely: the collapse. Before we go further, something needs to be said clearly. Most people will never examine their own psychology at this depth. They will remain inside reactive identities their entire lives without questioning them. If the kind of thinking in this video feels unusually precise compared to what you normally hear, subscribe, not for motivation, for clarity. Because clarity is rare, And once you start seeing these structures, you cannot return to the comfortable illusions most people live inside. Now, here is the critical point. When the old identity begins collapsing, it does not disappear cleanly. It resists, it negotiates, it attempts to survive, and the mind begins experiencing a disturbing sensation. You no longer feel like the person you used to be, but you also do not yet recognize the person you are becoming, which creates a psychological vacuum. And inside that vacuum, most people panic, because the human mind prefers a flawed identity over no identity at all. So it rebuilds the old structure, sometimes even stronger than before. But if someone does not rebuild it, if they remain inside that vacuum long enough, something else begins to reorganize itself. And that is where the real transformation begins. But very few people stay long enough to see it happen. The collapse begins the moment your old strategies stop producing relief, not success. Relief. That distinction matters. Because most of what you once called coping was never true stability. It was temporary relief purchased through self-betrayal. You kept the peace, so the tension dropped for a moment. You explained yourself carefully, so conflict was delayed. You made room for someone else's emotional volatility, so the atmosphere became manageable again. Each move reduced pressure in the short term, and because it reduced pressure, your mind labelled it useful. But usefulness is not the same as truth. And eventually, the psyche reaches a point where it can no longer keep confusing the two. This is where the old self starts losing coherence. You notice it first in your reactions. Things that once hooked you instantly now produce a different response. A pause, a distance, a flatness that is not numbness, but observation. Someone tries to pull guilt out of you, and instead of collapsing inward, you just see the mechanism. Someone performs disappointment to control your behavior, and instead of rushing to repair the mood, you register the tactic almost clinically. Someone withholds affection, approval, or warmth, and the familiar panic does not fully arrive. It flickers, but it does not take over. This is the early sign that the old structure is failing. The identity that once organized your behavior around fear of disconnection is beginning to lose authority, and that creates a strange internal condition. You become less willing to participate in your old role, but you have not yet built a new one. So from the outside, it looks like withdrawal, silence, isolation, reduced warmth, reduced enthusiasm. People who benefited from your previous responsiveness will interpret this as a problem. They will think something is wrong with you because something is now wrong for them. Access is shrinking. Predictability is disappearing. Your old emotional availability is no longer easy to reach, but from the inside, the experience is more severe than simple withdrawal. It feels like demolition. You start losing interest in certain conversations because you can hear the repetition inside them. The same insecurity disguised as confidence. The same manipulation disguised as need. The same performance of strength covering the same internal dependency. Social life begins to reveal itself as a theatre of compensations, and your appetite for participating drops. You may misread this stage and think you are becoming antisocial, bitter, detached, or emotionally damaged. That would be the wrong diagnosis. What is actually happening is that your psyche is withdrawing investment from false exchanges. The old self survived by staying entangled. The new self cannot form inside constant entanglement. It requires distance. This is why solitude becomes necessary. Not because solitude is inherently noble, because uninterrupted contact with noise makes reconstruction impossible. And this is where most people make a costly mistake. They enter this phase and treat the silence as a wound instead of a workshop. They interpret their reduced social appetite as a sign of decline. They become afraid of their own detachment and rush back into stimulation to prove they are still normal, still connected, still emotionally open. That return slows everything, because the old self is not dismantled through insight alone. It has to be starved of repetition, starved of the reactions that kept it alive, starved of the emotional transactions that reinforced it. That is why this phase feels so uncomfortable. You are not just losing habits, you are losing a structure that once told you who you were. And when identity begins breaking apart, the mind experiences it as danger. It would rather keep a dysfunctional personality than enter a period of psychological formlessness. So it starts bargaining. It tells you to keep one part of the old self. Stay perceptive, but more careful. Stay compassionate, but with better boundaries. Stay available, but only for the right people. These sound reasonable, but often they are just refined versions of the same architecture. The same self built around vigilance, usefulness, and emotional labor. The deeper transformation requires something harsher than adjustment. It requires discontinuity, a real break, a point where you stop trying to improve the old identity and allow it to become obsolete. That is why this phase feels like inner death, because in a sense, it is. The person who always scanned, softened, managed, anticipated, and absorbed cannot come with you. That version of you was built in response to pressure. It was adaptive, it was intelligent, it may have even protected you for a long time, but now it is blocking access to a more stable form of selfhood. And protective structures, once outdated, become prisons. This is also the stage where silence begins changing meaning. Earlier in life, silence may have meant suppression, fear, holding things in to avoid consequences. But in this stage, silence becomes concentration, a gathering of force, an end to unnecessary explanation. You stop narrating yourself so much. You stop defending your perception to people committed to misunderstanding it. You stop offering constant access to your internal process. And something important happens when that excessive expression stops. Energy returns, not all at once, gradually. You begin noticing that you are less drained after certain days, less mentally scattered, less fragmented by everyone else's emotional residue. Your thoughts become sharper. Your attention becomes more disciplined. You start to sense how much of your life was spent leaking psychological energy into places that gave nothing back. This realization is not pleasant, because with it comes another form of pressure. If you rebuild incorrectly now, you will become more dangerous to yourself than before. That is the part people rarely mention. When the old empathic identity collapses, the new self can form in two very different directions. One direction leads to sovereignty. The other leads to hardening. From the outside, they can look similar at first. Both appear quieter, more detached, less reactive, less accessible. But internally, they are entirely different. Sovereignty is grounded. Hardening is defensive. Sovereignty sees clearly and remains open by choice. Hardening shuts down to avoid injury. Sovereignty no longer needs to prove itself. Hardening secretly remains organized around past pain. Sovereignty can engage without losing itself. Hardening avoids engagement because the self is still fragile. This is why the reconstruction phase has to be handled with precision. If you simply become colder, more cynical, more emotionally armored, then the old self has not truly died. It has just changed costume. The wound is still in control. It is simply expressing itself through distance instead of overgiving. Many people stop there. They become controlled, but not free. Less available, but not whole. Hard to reach, but still internally governed by what hurt them. That is not transformation. That is inverted captivity. Real reconstruction is different. It does not remove your depth. It removes your compulsion. It does not make you indifferent. It makes you deliberate. It does not erase feeling. It restores command over feeling. And during this stage, while the old self is collapsing and the new one is not yet stable, you will feel unresolved psychological pressure almost every day. Pressure to explain yourself. Pressure to reconnect with old versions of intimacy. Pressure to prove you are still kind, still understanding, still safe for everyone else to lean on. You will feel the urge to rush the process because incompletion is difficult to tolerate. Do not trust that urge. Incomplete reconstruction produces elegant weakness. You look composed, but your center is still negotiable. You sound clear, but emotional pressure can still redirect you. You appear strong, but the wrong relationship can still reactivate the old operating system. That is why this stage takes longer than people expect. Because what is being rebuilt is not behavior, it is authority. And authority cannot be borrowed from language, aesthetics, or posture. It has to be built in direct contact with silence, solitude, restraint, and unobserved self-confrontation. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see where people are going through this quietly. Because the truth is that this phase is happening in private, in apartments, cars, offices, gyms, and late-night rooms where no one around you fully understands what is being dismantled. They think you are just becoming more reserved. They do not realize an entire identity structure is collapsing under the surface. And the most difficult part is this. You cannot go back without betraying what you now see. But you cannot move forward until you stop trying to save what is already ending. That leaves you in the exact place most people cannot endure, between selves. Still functional enough to appear normal, already altered enough to know normal is gone. And if you remain here without discipline, the collapse will not turn into power. It will turn into drift. That is the pressure now, not whether the old self is ending. It is already ending. The real question is what will be built in the empty space it leaves behind. At some point in this process, a dangerous idea begins to form. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. After years of absorbing pressure from other people, after recognizing manipulation patterns, emotional dependency, subtle guilt tactics, and psychological exploitation, the mind starts assembling a narrative. A very convincing one. It says the problem was always them. The manipulators, the narcissists, the emotionally unstable, the selfish, the unconscious. And there is truth in that observation. Many people do operate from unconscious patterns. Many relationships are built on imbalance. Many environments reward emotional exploitation because someone else is willing to carry the emotional load. But here is the moment where transformation either matures or collapses into bitterness. Because if the entire explanation for your past becomes they were the problem, you remain psychologically tied to them. You are still organized around reaction, just a different kind. Resentment, distance, cynicism. Your behavior changes, but your center is still defined by what others did. That is not sovereignty. That is opposition. And opposition is still dependency. The final break requires something much harder. You must accept that the system existed because you participated in it, not because you deserved harm, not because the behavior was fair, but because your identity structure allowed it to continue. That recognition feels brutal at first, because the mind wants a clean villain. It wants a simple story where you were the generous one and others exploited your kindness. But psychological systems are rarely that simple. Your perception was accurate, your compassion was real, but your internal boundaries were negotiable. Your attention was easily captured. Your emotional energy was accessible. And most importantly, your identity required being needed. That requirement is the hidden mechanism that kept the system alive. If someone needed help, you felt responsible. If someone was in pain, you felt compelled to intervene. If someone misunderstood you, you felt pressure to explain. If someone was disappointed, you felt obligated to repair. Each of these responses reinforced the same structure. Other people's emotional states became instructions for your behavior. And as long as that structure existed, certain personalities were inevitably drawn toward you. Not consciously, systemically. Human behavior follows energy. People move toward individuals who stabilize environments. People lean on those who absorb tension. People rely on the one person who never collapses publicly. And if you were that stabilizing force for years, you unintentionally trained the people around you. You trained them to rely on your flexibility, your patience, your tolerance, your emotional labor. Again, this is not blame, it is mechanics. If you do not understand the mechanics, the pattern will repeat. You will simply meet new people who discover the same access points, which is why the next phase of transformation demands something most people resist. Responsibility, not for what others did. Responsibility for what you will no longer allow to define you. That shift changes everything. Because the moment responsibility enters the system, victimhood begins losing its grip. And victimhood is seductive. It provides moral clarity. It provides justification. It provides a story where your suffering proves your virtue. But victimhood also freezes development. If you remain the person who was wronged, the person who was drained, the person who was misunderstood, then your identity still revolves around past injury. The wound remains the organizing center. The only difference is now it carries moral authority. That is still captivity. The final stage cannot form on that foundation. It requires emotional discipline, not suppression, containment. You must learn to experience anger without allowing anger to redesign your identity. You must experience disappointment without reorganizing your worldview around distrust. You must see manipulation without needing to prove anything to the manipulator. This is where the real training begins, because psychological sovereignty is not created by emotional insight alone. It is built through behavioral consistency, small decisions repeated daily. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop negotiating your perception with people committed to misunderstanding it. You stop volunteering emotional energy where it is not reciprocated. You observe more. You react less. You speak with precision instead of volume. You move through environments without absorbing their emotional weather. At first, this feels unnatural. Your nervous system is accustomed to constant engagement. It wants to scan. It wants to adjust. It wants to repair the atmosphere. But discipline interrupts that reflex. You notice the impulse and do nothing. Someone projects frustration onto you. You register it. You do not internalize it. Someone attempts to trigger guilt. You observe the tactic. You do not negotiate with it. Someone demands emotional access. You evaluate the request, not automatically grant it. These moments appear small, but they restructure the nervous system. Each time you refuse unconscious reaction, authority returns to the center. Gradually, a different kind of stability emerges, not the old stability built from accommodating others, a quieter one. You begin noticing that emotional pressure does not move you the same way anymore. People may still project, still manipulate, still test boundaries, but the hooks find less surface to attach to. And when hooks fail repeatedly, something interesting happens. The environment recalibrates. Certain personalities drift away, others adjust their behaviour, and some become uncomfortable with your presence altogether, not because you are hostile, because your psychological structure no longer participates in their familiar dynamics. This stage can feel isolating for a while. Old dynamics dissolve before new ones appear, but isolation here is not regression, it is filtration. The system around you is reorganizing in response to your new center, and the deeper your discipline becomes, the clearer something else begins to emerge. Your emotional system becomes quieter, not numb, clear. You still perceive everything, but perception no longer drags you into reaction. You begin choosing when to engage, choosing when to care, choosing when to intervene. Your empathy stops being a reflex. It becomes a tool, and tools are controlled, not compulsive. This is the stage where the transformation starts becoming visible to others. People cannot always explain it. They just feel something different. Your presence carries less emotional urgency, less need for approval, less hidden negotiation. You are simply there, unmoved by currents that once pulled you in every direction. And when a human being reaches that level of internal containment, something powerful begins forming. Gravity, not loud authority, not dominance. Gravity, the kind of psychological presence that stabilizes a room without trying. But that gravity only forms if you resist the temptation to return to old roles. Because the final stage requires something absolute, no partial loyalty to the old identity, no quiet attachment to the wound, no hidden desire to be seen as the one who suffered the most. Those fragments must dissolve completely, because what emerges in their absence is something far more stable than any identity built around pain. And once that structure finishes forming, something unusual happens. The sensitivity that once drained you becomes the sharpest instrument you possess. Not a burden, not a weakness, an advantage, but only if the reconstruction is complete. And that is the final stage few people ever reach. By the time someone reaches this final stage, something essential has already changed. Not in the way most people imagine transformation. There is no dramatic breakthrough moment, no sudden feeling of becoming powerful, no emotional high that confirms everything has shifted. The change is quieter than that. It shows up in your reactions, or more accurately, in the absence of them. Situations that once destabilized you now pass through your awareness without leaving a trace. Conversations that once pulled you into emotional negotiation now appear almost transparent. You see the patterns immediately, but you no longer feel the need to wrestle with them. Your perception remains sharp, but your center remains untouched. This is the point where the structure of your identity has finished reorganizing. For most of your life, your sensitivity operated like an open circuit. Every emotional signal entered your system without resistance. Other people's tension, disappointment, insecurity, and frustration moved directly into your internal world. Now, the circuit is different. You still detect everything, but detection no longer equals absorption. You walk into a room and immediately understand the emotional climate, but the atmosphere does not enter you. Someone projects anger, and it registers as information rather than pressure. Someone attempts manipulation, and instead of feeling guilt, you recognize the architecture of the tactic. The difference is simple but profound. Your internal state now originates from you, not from the environment. That is the foundation of psychological sovereignty. It means your mood does not depend on approval. Your clarity does not collapse under disagreement. Your direction does not bend under emotional pressure. This does not make you cold. It makes you stable. And stability is something the modern world rarely encounters. Most people are constantly reacting, Their emotional state shifts with every conversation, every message, every tension they encounter. They are pushed and pulled by forces they barely recognize. But when someone operates from internal authority, their presence changes the dynamics of every environment they enter. Not through dominance, through consistency. You are no longer trying to be understood. You are no longer trying to manage everyone's perception of you. You are no longer trying to repair every emotional disturbance around you. You move with clarity. You speak when something needs to be said. You remain silent when nothing needs to be proven. And because your behavior is no longer driven by insecurity, people feel something different in your presence. Weight, gravity, the kind of quiet authority that cannot be faked. Some people will respect it immediately. Some will feel uncomfortable around it. Others will attempt to provoke reactions, searching for the old access points that used to exist. But those access points are gone. Not because you built walls, because the identity they once connected to no longer exists. The person who needed approval is gone. The person who felt responsible for everyone's emotional stability is gone. The person who abandoned their perception to keep peace is gone. What remains is someone far more precise. You still understand human emotion deeply. You still recognize suffering. You still feel compassion. But now, your compassion is deliberate. You choose where it goes. You choose when it is given. You choose when someone's struggle belongs to them. This is what most people misunderstand about strength. Strength is not hardness. It is clarity. It is the ability to feel fully without losing yourself in what you feel. It is the ability to see human behavior clearly without needing to control it. And it is the ability to remain aligned with your own perception, even when the world around you prefers that you bend. Once someone reaches this stage, life begins to feel simpler. Not easier. Simpler. Decisions require less negotiation. Relationships become clearer. Your attention becomes more valuable because it is no longer scattered across every emotional signal around you. You begin investing your time and energy with precision, into work that matters, into people who operate with mutual respect, into growth that expands your capabilities rather than draining your stability. And the most surprising realization arrives slowly. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. Not your kindness, not your intelligence, not your emotional depth. Those qualities are no longer part of a performance. They are simply part of who you are. This is what Jung meant when he described the final stage. Not a person who cannot be hurt. A person who can be hurt without losing their center. Not a person who feels nothing. A person who feels everything without becoming controlled by it. Not a person who escaped their humanity. A person who has finally integrated it. Every strength, every shadow, every past wound transformed into something useful instead of something that defines them. And when someone reaches that point, something unexpected happens. Life opens again. Not because the world becomes kinder, because you are no longer navigating it from survival. You are navigating it from authorship. You decide where your attention goes. You decide what deserves your time. You decide who has access to your energy. And that level of internal authority changes the entire trajectory of a life. But this transformation is only the beginning. Because once you reclaim your center, a deeper question appears. What do you build with it? What kind of life do you construct once your energy is no longer leaking in every direction? What becomes possible when your perception is clear and your attention is fully your own? That is the next stage. And in the video appearing on your screen right now, we are going deeper into the psychological structures that allow someone to build a life from this level of clarity and internal control. Watch that next video. because understanding how to reclaim your center is only the first step. Learning how to use it is where the real transformation begins. Subscribe if you are building this version of yourself deliberately.